Hey, thanks for watching. We are beginning our series on wisdom literature in the Old Testament. So today we're actually going to start with the book of Job. We're going to do several weeks in the book of Job. This will probably be one of the more in-depth classes I've ever done on the book of Job. So I'm excited about it. I think it's got a lot of good things in store for us, some things that we can take from it and apply to our lives. So I'm excited. Let's get started. I think one of the biggest things we need to understand about the book of Job, when we normally come to the book of Job, we come asking questions, and we often ask the wrong questions. Like in Acts chapter 3, the beggar asks Peter the wrong question. We are asking too insignificant questions. Our questions are much too simplistic for what actually the book of Job has for us. You see, Job teaches us that what we thought were the really important answers, they're just not significant enough, and it dismisses them outright. Instead, it gives us a whole series of answers. And if we pay attention, we are going to find answers to questions that we weren't asking. And not to just make that sound too high in the air, not to get your hopes too high up that the book of Job is all of a sudden going to answer any theological question you've ever had. I think we have come to the book of Job with the wrong questions in hand, asking the wrong things. And we're going to see that plays out throughout the whole book. Job's friends, and even Job himself, they're asking the wrong questions. They are considering the wrong things, accusing the wrong people, thinking that God has motives that he doesn't actually have, so on and so forth. So hopefully the book of Job is going to do is clear up for us this issue of evil and looking just straight at the text. We're not looking at anything else. I think we're going to find some really interesting, deep questions, deep answers that God has for us. One thing that we're going to notice right off the bat in the first couple of chapters is you have Job asking some questions and the challenger, which in some Bible translations, I think the NIV has Satan as explicit as Satan. Some people say the adversary. I think the challenger is a really good interpretation of that word. So the challenger comes to God, accusing God of ethical counterproductivity, in that he is rewarding good people just for being good. And so if God is going to do that, then all that he's going to create are a bunch of people only doing good because they know they're going to be blessed. That's the sole purpose behind it. Job comes asking a completely different question, accusing God of something completely different. He comes accusing God of being theologically counterintuitive, in that he is allowing faithful, righteous people to suffer bad things. So God is having two accusations come at him right in the beginning chapters of the book of Job. And when we realize that there is this balance going on, that Job is not actually the person on trial, but that God is. God's actions are on trial. I think the entire book opens up for us. So I want to do a couple of background points to make. I think we can consider this class kind of an introduction to the book of Job. Kind of gives a nice introduction, go through the first 2 or 3 chapters, and that'll be it for our class today. So the author and date. This one is an easy one to answer. We don't know. We don't know the author. We don't know anything about him. We don't know the date. We have no idea when this book was written. We have some clues, though, and they're not even great clues. As far as author goes, it's completely unknown. There's no one in the oldest text that we have of Job. No one wrote their name at the top. No one even said, hey, this book is written for this group of people. It's just this story. All that we have is this story. So we have no idea who wrote it. And the date is not that much easier. There are a couple of place names. There are a couple of proper names given, but not enough to give us a firm date. So all that we can really say is based on some of the language used, is that we could place this in the period of the patriarchs. So sometime in the realm of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this story was at least written. So that means that this actual happening, if this was a historical occurrence, and it's some person named Job or someone like Job went through all these things, experienced all these things. It happened either during the time of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or sometime before them. And that's all that we can go for author and date. Down in the show notes, I will kind of throw out what I think is a pretty good sampling of an outline of the book of Job. A way to look at it is from John Walton's commentary in the NIV commentary series, and I think he's got a great way of divvying up our outline here. There's not too much of a difference between how other people outline the book. It seems that this book of Job, it is a poetic book, definitely. It is definitely wisdom literature, so it can actually be broken up pretty succinctly. And again, we'll get to the whole wisdom literature part here also. One thing to point out, and what a lot of skeptics of the book of Job will point out, is that the book of Job is very similar to other ancient Near Eastern texts around the same period. But what you would find out is if you read some of those stories from the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, Babylon, all of those cultures have a story like Job, similar to Job. But if you go to actually read those and then read the book of Job, you'll see that there are actually many more differences than there are similarities. If anything, we could say that Job was the first of these stories that other cultures appropriated and kind of made their own. But Job is very unique, especially in the message that he brings, especially in his idea of who Yahweh is, of who the big God is. Other cultures had their gods, had lesser gods and greater gods. Job gives a very special, a very unique outlook on how God operates. So it's very different than any other ancient Near Eastern text that we have available. One idea that's going to come up a lot, one that I'm going to refer to a lot, is called the retribution principle. And it is something that Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, three of Job's friends, that is the principle that they hold to, and it's the principle that they're arguing for. And it is the principle that directed a lot of Israel's thinking, even in our Old Testament. It directed a lot of its thinking and might even explain some of the way that Job's friends think about God and the way that he acts. And so this is the retribution principle. It's the idea that God does good things for righteous people and then punishes wicked people. And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it is a very common belief, even modern day people. Modern people would even say that that is a true thing, that God blesses righteous people, punishes wicked people. And while that is a very broad principle, I don't think it's exactly accurate. Jesus actually corrects some Pharisees' teaching in John chapter 9, in the story of a blind man. They say, oh, this man's blind because he has sin in his life. And Jesus says, nope, that's not what's happened. And they says, oh, he's blind because of what his parents have done. And Jesus says, nope, that's not what's happened. So Jesus cuts it out pretty bluntly. But this seems to be the way of thinking that three of Job's friends hold on to, and it's the side of the argument that they're taking. So what we're going to see here is actually, if you could picture a triangle, you've got the three corners. There are three arguments that are taking place. Three groups of people that are arguing for a certain thing. You could have at the top corner is God's justice. And it looks that Yahweh and Elihu, who is the fourth friend of Job, they're arguing for God's justice. That God is just, he has good character, what he's doing is right and good, and it shouldn't be questioned. You have the retribution principle, which Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar are arguing for. And then you have Job's righteousness, who Job is the only one arguing for that. What that looks like is Job is saying, hey, I'm a good person. These things shouldn't happen to me. I'm righteous. There has been no sin. There's no reason these things should be happening. That's Job's sole argument. His friends are arguing for, no, it's true that the righteous people are rewarded and the wicked are punished. So because you are suffering, you must be wicked. You just don't realize it. That's what they're arguing for. And then you have God and Elihu, who both come in at the end, arguing for God's justice. So if you can imagine that triangle and the three different arguments, those are the kind of the camps that they're pushed into. That's one way to kind of frame the whole argument that's going on. So with that being said, that's really all the introductory material we can do on the book of Job. That's all that we are afforded. So from here on out, we're going to be going chapter by chapter. I won't be doing a verse by verse because there's a lot in here, and actually a lot of it ends up being redundant. So, but what we do get from Job is a lot of eclectic language that's not used in the rest of the Old Testament. So we'll be looking at a lot of the words and the phrases and a lot of the theology that's brought up in the book of Job. So let's get started. First thing you can do is open up to chapter 1 and read through chapter 1. And we're going to talk about it for a little bit. So Job comes from Uz, which is, we don't know where that's at. We think the best place to put it is somewhere around South Arabia. That's about as close as we're going to be able to hone in on it. So the big thing about that, it doesn't really matter where Job's from, but what this does tell us is that he's not an Israelite. He's not someone who has grown up under the old covenant, especially if, as we have proposed, that he is in the time of the patriarchs. It makes sense that he's not familiar with law and covenant, and that makes sense why those two words aren't found in this book at all. There is no appeal to the law of Moses. Job doesn't know about it. So what we're left with is Job is not an Israelite in a time before the law. He's also considered blameless and upright, and as you could guess, both of these words are an indication of righteous living, and specifically someone who has found favor in the eyes of man and God. So maybe it's similar to like a Luke 2:52, where Jesus is seen as finding favor and growing and maturing in the eyes of God and of man. That's how Job is depicted here. He has what appears to be living righteously, not perfect, but in a way that has gained him favor with God and with man. He has a fear of Elohim, which is the Hebrew word it's just a general word for God. So in the Old Testament, when we hear Yahweh, that's the name that God has chosen to identify himself by. That's the one that he calls himself when he approaches Moses through the burning bush. He says, I am who I am Yahweh, God of Israel. So Elohim is just the general word for God, gods. And so it says that Job has a fear of Elohim and not necessarily specific to Yahweh. So we could take that a couple ways. We could say, oh, he must be a pagan who just seems to be a good pagan. But that can't be the case. Throughout the rest of the book of Job, he is able to talk about Yahweh in a very specific way. He is definitely a monotheist. He believes in one creator God. And so maybe that looks a little different than mine and your understanding of who God is now. But clearly who Job was, he was living and worshiping in a way that was pleasing to our Yahweh. It could maybe be comparable to the sailors in the book of Jonah, when they hear of God and he is causing this massive storm to come up, and they realize that this is the God that Jonah serves. They fear him. They may not have this perfect understanding of who he is, but out of this fear for Jonah's God, they act and live accordingly. It's also maybe the same type of fear that the Israelites had in respect to the covenant, and maybe they had different responses, but they all feared God. One thing that's brought up in this chapter is cursing God. For instance, Job would offer sacrifices on behalf of his kids just in case while they were out partying at night, they had cursed God unintentionally. That's a good dad. A good dad looking out for his kids, making sacrifices, going to God saying, please forgive my children for any sin they might not even know they're committing. What's interesting here is that the same word there's the same Hebrew word that can be translated bless or curse. And throughout Job, that word is used. So it can kind of become a little confusing. A lot of it has to be based on context. what Job is trying to say, what the book of Job is trying to tell us. But so we have to ask ourselves the question, what is cursing God? What could his children have been doing that would have been taken as them actually cursing God? And I think it's interesting if we go through the Old Testament, what cursing God looks like. And so there's 6 ways that we can actually curse God. Taking credit for what God has done, misjudging God's motives, thinking that God will not act, expressing one's ambitions against God, expressing one's arrogance, and stating that there is no God. In the book of Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Psalms, all of these instances are referred or explicitly called cursing God. So that's pretty extreme. I think a lot of times you and I would just think of cursing God as maybe taking his name in vain, but there are some really definite ways that the Old Testament spells out that we are capable of cursing God. So finally, coming onto the scene is the challenger, and he arrives with the sons of God. Again, some translations will actually take sons of God and turn it into angels and say that these angels approached or came into the throne room of God. That's, again, not a really good translation, and it's sad that some translations use that. But the actual word there, the term, is sons of God. And the only other time this phrase is used is only a handful of times in the Old Testament, and it's always referring to a divine counsel of God. And it's something we don't really talk about a lot. But it seems like in the Old Testament, and it would make sense that even in the New Testament and even in our modern day, that God has a council of divine beings that he consults with, that he allows to converse with him. We might think this is crazy and foreign sounding, but that's exactly what he did with the prophets. That's exactly how his relationship with Moses and Abraham. They all had this ability to talk and communicate with God, give suggestions, request things. That seems to be what this divine counsel is. And that's who this challenger comes in with. Again, this challenger is often named Satan in some people's translations. The Hebrew word is a definite article, then with the word challenger. And so for some reason, people take that to mean Satan, but it's just not a good translation. Especially, we could note that any other time Satan's name is used in, say, the New Testament, the definite article is never placed in front of it. So the Hebrew never places a definite article in front of a proper name anyway. So the fact that it says the challenger, we know it's not referencing the Satan that we are more familiar with from the New Testament. This is, in fact, just a challenger. We could probably equate it to the snake in the garden. You know, the snake is never called Satan. The snake is never referred to as the devil. It is simply an adversary. It is someone who has ulterior motive, someone who is trying to pull God's people away from him, someone who might be offering bad suggestions. But even then, that's not what the challenger does in this scenario. So if we want to compare the profile of Satan to the profile of the challenger, we're going to get 2 very different profiles that pop up. For one, the challenger never initiates this conversation about Job. God actually does that. Okay, he does not accuse Job of being a bad person. He more challenges God's policy of only rewarding righteous people, of keeping a hedge up around righteous people. So he's actually judging the way God is doing something, questioning the way that God is doing something, not what Job is doing. And even when all these bad things happen to Job, the challenger doesn't rejoice. He doesn't take pride in it. It's not an evil thing that once it's accomplished, the challenger is like, yay, I did it. That doesn't seem to be the profile of the challenger. The challenger is someone who has walked in, has seen the way that God's operating, and says, well, I don't think it should be done this way. I don't think this is the best way it could be done. You and I often do that in our own thinking. We say, God, why are you doing this? You could do it this way, and it would be much better. It seems that God is allowing this conversation to take place, that someone has come in, questioned his motives, and now he's going to allow this person, this challenger, to actually follow through with that question. So he's going to allow the challenger to have these things happen to Job in order to prove that God is being righteous. This goes back to that point I was making where the book of Job is not about judging Job and seeing if he is living a righteous life or not, and that's why he's being punished. It's actually God is being put on trial. He is being tested to see if he's actually a righteous God. And that's what the challenger is doing here. So the question ends up being, towards Job at least, is he truly righteous, or is he just acting that way so that he will be benefited through his righteous acts? That's what the challenger wants to know. Is Job actually a good person? Is he actually love God? The challenger, in a sense, is saying, no, he's not. He's only doing that because God is going to bless him. And so Job is simply doing good things so God will bless him. So that's kind of the policy of God that's on trial right now. So we also have a mention of Job possibly worshiping when all of this bad stuff happens. And it's actually, the word better translated just means someone reacting to something magnificent that God has done. This word's only used 4 other times in the Old Testament. It's never in the context necessarily of worshiping, just a prostration, laying yourself flat out on the ground, face down on the ground. And it's just this posture to take when you're recognizing that something is being done by God. Okay, moving into chapter 2. The sons of God again come to Yahweh. This is after the challenger has taken everything good away from Job. His herds and his cattle, his children, his property, it's all taken from him. And so what's going to happen in the second scenario is now bad things will be given to him. So good external things that God has given him were taken away. In the second scenario, bad things are brought on him. And right off the bat, someone might be saying that's injustice. Why is God taking these things from Job? But in the context especially of the book of Job, it's expressed that everything does belong to God. So it's really Job isn't having anything taken from him because all those things belong to God in the first place. God is actually, if we're looking at this as like the challenger challenging the policy of God of doing good things to good people, the way it's being challenged is, well, look, let's take all the good things away from Job and see if he still does good things. Will someone be good knowing they won't be rewarded? Knowing that rewards will actually be taken from them. Is your love of God actually true? And so that's kind of the deeper question being posed by the challenger here. So his friends come in. They stay with him for 7 days and 7 nights. That could be a sign of, they're coming to be with him, but they're also like ignoring him and not talking to him because they think he has done something truly awful to have all these bad things done to him. So we could see this as kind of like a snobby move from his friends. Or it could be that they are genuine and they are coming to kind of just empathize and commiserate with him while he's going through all of this. It's also in this context of chapter 2 that his wife looks at Job and just says, you need to curse God and die. In that, hey, everything's been taken from you. Clearly you've done something wrong. Just curse him and be done with it. You're clearly already about to die. All of these sores have been given to him where he is having to break pottery and actually scratch his skin with them because he's in so much pain. So it's a really awful scenario that Job's definitely in a bad situation here. An important thing to point out is in verse 3 where it says these things happen to Job without reason or without cause. That goes to show back already that this retribution principle, this idea that God only does good things for good people and bad things to bad people, isn't true. Because these bad things are happening to Job without reason. Yahweh says here in the second chapter, he reaffirms Job's righteousness. So there's no reason that we should be thinking that Job has actually done something bad to deserve it. What's interesting to look at as we're going to continue going through the rest of these chapters is that Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar really have 3 ways of looking at things. We have kind of Eliphaz is more of a spiritualist, Bildad a traditionalist, and Zophar the rationalist. And we'll get into that a little bit as we go through further chapters. And maybe the last thing to point out, we're just going to quickly hit on chapter 3. And at chapter 3, finally Job speaks. His friends have been with him for 7 days, and Job finally has the strength to speak. And all that he does for the whole chapter, it's broken up into 3 parts. He curses the day he was born. The second section is him talking about how he wishes he was never born. And the third section turns to the evil of the current day. And so it's just a lot of negativity. It's a lot of self-loathing. I mean, he goes far as to say, I wish the day in which I was born never existed. I was born on the 9th of December. And so to say, I just wish the day of the 9th of December never existed. That's how much I hate my existence. That's how much pain I'm in. That's how much hatred I have for life right now. Job is definitely in an awful place. And so I know we're leaving in a depressing part of the story, but we won't really find any resolution until the very end of Job. So this whole 4 or 5 weeks that we're going to be in Job is going to be depressing. But it's going to answer a lot of questions for us. These questions relating to God, the way he operates, why he does the things he does. Is he just in doing what he's doing? Just big questions here answered in the book of Job. So I'm excited to be going through it with you. Thanks for tuning in. I pray that you're finding ways to love and serve your neighbor in genuine and sincere ways. Peace and love.